Never in the history of all podcasting has a show begun with two different countdowns like I just did. Wow. Welcome to a new HIAC Talk Radio 452. I say that so I remember when I type it. When we're doing all this good stuff, I guess like, okay, it's 452. Gotta remember 452. I'm the above average comedian, Dan Calachico. Follow me on Twitter, Dan83. Craig Laguns is here. You can follow him at Craig Laguns, and he'll spell it out for you later because I don't know it either. It's LIGGEONS. I did it. COLACICCO for me, but just look up Dan83. And we had Chris on last week. So this week is just going to be, we're going to catch up on 2 weeks of the wrestling historian. And with that being said, Mr. Laguns, take it over.
Thank you, Mr. Calachico. That's easy for you to say. My name is Craig Laguns, and I'd like to take you right now, wrestling fans, back to a time where titles were actually called belts, where if you got thrown into the crowd, you were thrown into fans, not the universe. And back when sports entertainment was professional wrestling. There's a notable theme on this episode of HIAC Talk Radio and Wrestling Historian, because several big things occurred during these last 2 weeks of professional wrestling, and they center around two huge annual pay-per-view events happenings that took place in two of the big major wrestling federations, which you will see. We're going to start off, which you will hear, sorry, November 21st, 1977. This is a big date because I remember exactly where I was and how excited I was. Tony Garea and Larry Zbyszko finally won the Worldwide Wrestling Federation Tag Team Championship. They defeated the Yukon Lumberjacks. Now, Tony Garea and Larry Zbyszko, for those of you who didn't know, were the preeminent babyface tag team in the old WWF. They always came up short. They could never beat Mr. Fuji and Professor Tanaka. They couldn't beat the Executioners. They couldn't beat the Blackjacks. And they went up against the Yukon Lumberjacks, and they finally won the big one. And to hear a young Vince McMahon Jr. say, how many weeks, how many months, how many years have we waited? And it finally happened. So Tony Garea and Larry Zbyszko made my 11-year-old heart very proud when they finally won the Worldwide Wrestling Federation Tag Team Championship on November 21st, 1977. That same day, November 21st, 1999, at WCW Mayhem, renamed after WCW World War III, never caught on, in the finals of a 32-person tournament final. I say 32-person, not 32 men, because I believe Medusa and/or Daphne was involved in this tournament to crown a new WCW champion. Bret Hart defeated Chris Benoit to win the WCW Heavyweight Championship. And that will be the final reign of Bret Hart as WCW champion, almost a year after he signed with the company in the first place. And November 21st, 2005, on the heels of the death of Eddie Guerrero, whom I mentioned in last week's episode, the WWE on this date, November 21st, 2005, instituted the wellness policy.
Wow.
Again, it's a shame that the tragedy of losing Eddie Guerrero had to result in that, but the WWE's wellness policy has proven to be effective. Not altogether effective. We've still lost quite a few wrestlers before their time since 2005, but the wellness policy is something that's taken seriously, and it's caused suspensions, fines, and outright firings of wrestlers who didn't or failed the wellness test. So the primary health of the WWE performers has, because of the wellness policy, has been more reviewed and more looked at than at any time before. So on the 9 days after the death of Eddie Guerrero, the WWE wellness policy was instituted. November 22nd, 1990, Survivor Series in Hartford, Connecticut. We mentioned this last week on the show. The debut, not in an egg, but the debut of The Undertaker. Walked to the ring by Brother Love, and he was announced as Kane The Undertaker. Mean Mark Callis, late of WCW, made his debut at the Survivor Series. Going on almost 30 years now. It used to be a decade of decadence. It's been 30 years of stuff from The Undertaker.
Why don't you go on your rant you were going on off air?
Off the air, fans of this podcast, I went on a rant about The Undertaker. I've made no secret on this very podcast, if you've been listening for any length of time, I've never been a fan of The Undertaker. I still consider him the most overrated professional wrestler of his era. I made up, in my rant, I made up a list of 10 of, I don't consider The Undertaker one of the top 10 superstars of all time. And I'm saying superstars, I'm not saying professional wrestlers. I'm drinking the WWE Kool-Aid and calling them superstars. But if I was rating the top 10 WWE superstars of all time, Undertaker wouldn't be anywhere near my top 10. But I will say he is, by Stone Cold Steve Austin's declaration and the interview that he did with The Undertaker this past week after the Survivor Series was excellent. The Undertaker is the greatest character that the WWE has ever come up with. Again, it's almost 30 years now, and turning Mean Mark Callis into The Undertaker, and the way he's run with it has been tremendous. But that Undertaker, made his debut November 22nd, 1990. Going against one of his idols. He eliminated one of his idols, Dusty Rhodes, in that match. But like I said in last week's show, the Survivor Series makes stars. One of the biggest ones they ever did was the debut of The Undertaker, November 22nd, 1990. On that same date, going back a ways, just a little obscure thing. On November 22nd, 1968, Dan, Joe Scarpa defeated the Assassin 2, Tom Renesto, for the Georgia Television Championship. Now, Joe Scarpa, who we now know as Hall of Famer Chief J. Strongbow.
That's right.
But he won the
second.
Yeah, Joe Scarpa. But he was crowned the first Georgia TV champion on November 22nd, 1968. Now, the Georgia Television Championship would later go on to be the National Television Championship, but it's been held by some of the greatest wrestlers of all time. The National Television Championship, this is at a time where the Superstation was the only cable station that people got, and it was one of the first cable stations anywhere, and the strength of it wasn't just Atlanta Braves baseball, it was wrestling. So the first time anyone ever got cable, you got the Superstation and you got Georgia Championship Wrestling. And the Georgia TV champion was the number 2 title there, but it was the most widely seen title of anywhere. And it was because of that TV championship that other federations that had TV deals had TV champions. And some of the great former Georgia TV champions, former national TV champions, Ted DiBiase, Kevin Sullivan, Junkyard Dog, Tommy Rich, Roddy Piper.
Wow.
The national TV championship meant that you were a big deal. Steve Kerr, Bobby Eaton, Tony Atlas, all former Georgia TV championships and TV champion holders. But Joe Scarpa, Chief J. Strongbow, was the first, and he won it November 22nd, 1968. November 23rd, 1981, in Madison Square Garden, Pedro Morales with a diving headbutt, and then picking up the brass knuckles dropped by the Magnificent Morocco. On this date, November 23rd, 1981, Pedro Morales became the first two-time Intercontinental Champion. Pedro Morales, the third Intercontinental Champion of all time, but he became the first man to hold the title twice when he defeated the Magnificent Morocco. He had a pair of brass knuckles in his hands, and he threw Morales against the ropes and was going to come back and deck him. Morales came off the ropes head first, right into Morocco's stomach. Morocco clutched his gut and dropped the brass knuckles. Pedro picked it up and with that left hand knocked out the Magnificent Morocco to become the first two-time Intercontinental Champion. On that date, staying on that date, November 23rd, 1994, Survivor Series, San Antonio. Noticing a theme here? 4 years after making his debut, The Undertaker defeated Yokozuna in a casket match. Diesel and Shawn Michaels would win the WWF Tag Team Championship by defeating the Head Shrinkers, formerly the Samoan SWAT team. One of those shrinkers being Rikishi, father of the Usos. Well, Diesel and Shawn Michaels won the World Tag Team Championship at Survivor Series, and then they split up after winning the tag team title. And on that same card, the main event, Bob Backlund, the new Mr. Backlund, defeated Bret Hart to regain the Worldwide Wrestling Federation Heavyweight Championship, the same title that he won. He first won in 1978.
Jeez.
16 years later, he won by defeating Bret Hart. Now, it was a submission match. Bret Hart was trapped in the chicken wing by Mr. Backlund's chicken wing, but it was Davey Boy's wife who threw in the towel. I'm sorry, it was Bret Hart's mom who threw in the towel because Davey Boy was knocked out, and he was in Bret's corner, and Owen Hart had the other towel, but Mrs. Hart took the Davey Boy's towel and threw it in the ring. Bret Hart never submitted, but because the towel was thrown in, just like the way Backlund lost the title by having the towel thrown in when he didn't submit, and Bret Hart would lose the WWF Heavyweight Championship to Bob Backlund. Bob Backlund become a two-time champion, and he said in his post-match interview, I just regained the belt because I never lost the championship. But
yeah, okay.
November 23rd, but 16 years after he first won it, Bob Backlund won the championship again. And especially for you, Dan, November 23rd, 2014, 5 years ago, Survivor Series, St. Louis.
Oh, God.
Yes, the WWE debut of the man called Sting.
It's very interesting because on the network they just debuted that what is that series called where they non-kayfabe it and they talk about a match or an incident during a match, and the one they just looked at was the Clash of Champions against Seth Rollins, where Sting took the buckle bomb wrong twice and screwed up his neck. And it's still weird to me, being the Sting mark that I grew up to be, that happened. It's almost like it's a dream. And I don't mean it was a dream for me to see Sting in the WWE. I don't mean that. 20 years later, 20 years earlier, it would have been a dream. But it seems like it was a fever dream because I still... When he came out, I'm a Sting mark. I don't care who knows. Anybody who knows me well knows what a mark of Sting I am. I was a little stinger when I was growing up. When he came out, because it's one of those things. That was the last time. That was right at the beginning where I stopped reading all dirt sheets. I was like, all right, I give up. I don't want to hear it. I don't want to hear it ahead of time. I don't want to know who's backstage. It's partly taking away from, the excitement of seeing somebody. And I saw a few rumors. By the way, the opening segment of AEW was hilarious if you haven't seen it yet. But I saw a couple of rumors and I was like, no, I don't want to know. I don't want to know. And by the time the end of the show happened, I had forgotten I read it. And then, Triple H goes to throw the pin on for Seth and the crow. And as soon as I heard the crow, I was like, I had to go back and watch it because Kelly was just staring at me. The room telescoped, and all I could see was the TV screen. And I saw it happen. I saw him come out. I didn't hear what Michael Cole said or King said the first time. I didn't hear the crowd. I saw him walk down to the ring. I saw him nail Triple H. The sound kind of slowly came back, and the show was over. I had to watch it twice to get the effect of what had actually happened, because that was something that was never going to happen. He was never going to be in the WWE. He was never going to be there, never set foot in the ring, let alone less than a year later, vied for the WWE title. Now, one of the things that circle around, because it was a great moment, I was like, he was over. That place went nuts. He missed the hard cam, but he nailed the reverse DDT, the Scorpion Death Drop on Triple H, helped the win. And Sting was in the WWE. And when just to cut back to your wrestling story, and I know you did this to allow me to expound. But if you fast forward a little bit, when he came out in the statue box, it's still so surreal to see a Raw tag on that. It's still so surreal to see him in the ring with a. We don't talk about WrestleMania because when we were doing shows leading up to it, I knew everybody's like, "Who do you pick?" I'm like, "I picked Triple H. Sting's not winning," and I knew what he was going to do, and that's what happened. It is still so weird to see him having fun on TV again, participating in matches, cutting promos that were decent. There's a guy that benefited from a scripted promo. Not for nothing. Whether he's good or not is not up for debate at this point, because we can debate that he was okay, but not great. The guy was a trained actor. Went to acting school. He did a few movies. He can read a script and deliver lines. So in that way, a guy like that, who was never good at a promo, even though he's a legend, he benefited from the promo script. The one thing that disappointed me in that little special they did on the WWE Network is they didn't tell you who was going to go over. I was kind of hoping they'd break that much kayfabe and they'd say, well, we were going to have Sting win. At least lie to me. At least lie. Because remember, Sheamus was Money in the Bank at the time. And as the match is going on, I was like, have Sting win, have him get your picture with the crowd going nuts and him hold the belt. And then just have Sheamus come out and just kill him. Just have Sheamus kill him, do the bro kick, cover 1, 2, 3, and get the hell out of there. Not only did are you the champ, you destroyed Sting. And that's it. He retires. He goes down. He retires. I just wanted that picture with the title. That's just me. That's just me rambling as a Sting fan. As the great Harry Barnett would say, and he's probably right, Dan, get over it.
Let it go. Let it go.
Sting doesn't bother me anyway. Hey, it's Ted. Ted Irvine's on TV. It's Mr. Jericho at AEW. Yeah. What's up, Ted?
And he cut a better promo than The Undertaker did. So
Ted Irvine did, or Chris Jericho?
Ted Irvine, Mr. Jericho.
Amazing.
Yes.
So I'm assuming you saw Soul Train Jones.
I did. I saw the ghost of Soul Train Jones. I saw the when you see later on in the segment the stiffness of Soul Train Jones. I think Soul Train Jones died a long time ago and no one told him, because if you saw the way he sells, you'd think, oh yeah, they got a corpse in there with him. Not working well with others. But I'm glad they dug him up and gave him a job. I'm happy for him.
The two of them, he's wearing the Rangers jersey and Dad wearing the home of the Blackhawks.
Doesn't care. But listen to the heat he gets though.
Yeah, I will. I'll have to go back and watch that later. Ted, that was a good listen. And it's technically part of Wrestling Historian. he had his dad on Talk is Jericho once, and he talked old hockey, and that was the best to me. Selfishly, the best episode of that show ever was. Certainly not the one with Ted Donald Trump Jr. Anyway, keep going. The show is wrestling story.
Moving on, November 24th, 1983, one of the most historic days of professional wrestling, because on this date, now there's always been traditional Thanksgiving cards in the Mid-Atlantic area. They've always had huge cards in the Mid-Atlantic area or in Georgia or in Mid-South. This time they decided to capitalize on it. November 24th, 1983 was the very first Starrcade.
Oh, yeah.
Held in Greensboro, North Carolina. It was put on closed circuit TV in Richmond, Virginia, in Florida, in Puerto Rico, and all the NWA strongholds in the South. And it's the biggest card the NWA had ever put on, with some still 3 matches that still stick out as classics, all on one card. The Roddy Piper Greg Valentine dog collar match. Ricky Steamboat, Jay Youngblood regained the NWA Tag Team Championship from the Briscoes, culminating on their feud that had been going on for a year. And Ric Flair defeated Harley Race to regain the NWA Heavyweight Championship. Harley Race, who was approached by Vince McMahon a week earlier and up until 2 days before Starrcade, to come to the WWF and with the NWA belt, and Harley turned Vince down flat, because even Vince McMahon knew way back in 1983 that Starrcade and the NWA was the bigger brand. This was 2 months before Hulk Hogan was signed. He was still wanted to get out from underneath the Bob Backlund umbrella, wanted to create bigger stars, and he offered Harley Race a king's ransom, no pun intended, to come to the WWF with the belt, with the NWA belt, and Harley turned him down, to do the job for Ric Flair, and that would be the last time Harley Race would ever be the NWA Heavyweight Championship. But Starrcade was on the map. And this was one of the brainchilds of Dusty Rhodes, who wasn't even on the card, but did color commentary in a 3-piece suit at ringside.
He did. Yes. That dog collar match. It's funny. I was actually telling Jenny about this last week because we were talking about weird matches with weird. I'm just going to do this quick, sir. So you keep your mic down. Weird stipulations, and I told her, "Oh, you never heard of the dog collar match? What the hell's the dog collar match?" Well, you tie a dog collar on. She's never seen one. I told her you gotta see. What's the one I mentioned? I mentioned this one. I said you gotta see probably the best one and probably the most brutal, which is Valentine and Piper. And I know it's quick in the match when he gets his eardrum broken and he just bleeds. I'm pretty sure from Piper's mouth himself that his ears were never the same after that.
No, and the dog collar match was the blow off match between the feud, because Piper's ear was actually ruptured 3 months earlier. He had to give up the United States Championship because he legitimately couldn't stand up. His equilibrium was gone. Valentine caught him on the side of the ear. His ear was bleeding profusely, and he had to surrender the United States Championship. And because of that, of the legitimate hearing loss, that's what fueled their feud through that whole summer. So the blow off was the dog collar match between Piper and Valentine, and still talked about. And the tag team championship between Steamboat and Youngblood and the Briscoes, and all their matches were just clinics. Everyone talks about the Ricky Steamboat arm drag. Ricky Steamboat arm drag, which is so copied and so iconic. He stole it from Jack Briscoe. He was trying to be like Jack Briscoe. So you have 4 of the greatest wrestlers in, and not only that, but 2 of the best tag teams in all of wrestling going at each other. And their match was again a clinic, and Ric Flair regaining the NWA Championship and just putting his claim on being the best. And the parentheses for that first Starrcade was Starrcade, Flair for the gold. And that was when Rick won his second championship, the second of 16. But that finally legitimized him as the man because, like I said, Harley Race would never hold the NWA Championship again. And Flair would set off on his own path of dominance, and he would be synonymous with the 10 pounds of gold that we refer to today. But the very first Starrcade, the granddaddy of them all, the one that started all the other federations of having big cards during Thanksgiving, started with Starrcade. And all the great, it's almost ironic because 3 months later, 4 months, most of the stars that were on Starrcade would be in the WWF.
Okay.
Piper, Valentine, Steamboat, the Briscoes would all be in the WWF at some point in 1984. November 25th, 1982, in the Mid-South territory Thanksgiving show. 1982 in the Superdome, Stagger Lee would defeat Ted DiBiase for the North American Heavyweight Championship. Stagger Lee appeared mysteriously after Junkyard Dog was suspended. While he lost a loser leave town match to Ted DiBiase, who turned on him. At the time in 1982, this was the biggest heel turn in professional wrestling history. Ted DiBiase, who had been a babyface everywhere he's gone, but knocked out Junkyard Dog, his best friend, the best man in his wedding, with a loaded glove to win the North American Championship. And Ted DiBiase turned heel for the first time, and Ted DiBiase became the most hated man in all of professional wrestling. And Junkyard Dog, who was the People's Champion, the most popular wrestler in the South, had to leave, and had to leave the territory for 30 days. And in his stead, this masked man who looked a lot like Junkyard Dog, but called himself Stagger Lee, he finally won the North American Championship from Ted DiBiase in the Superdome on their Thanksgiving show. One of the earlier matches on that card, Dan, Iron Mike Sharp defeated a guy named Marty Lund on the second match of that card. Marty Lund, who we all know now as Arn Anderson. So back in 1982, Arn Anderson wrestled in the Superdome in a super card there.
Real quick, his rise was pretty quick, wasn't it, Arn Anderson's?
It was. When he came out in 82, he was immediately given a big push in the Southeastern Territory and in Georgia. He and Matt Bourne were supposed to be the next big tag team. They were scheduled to have been the original Doink. But Arn Anderson and Matt Bourne, the Revival. Arn Anderson and Matt Bourne were the Revival before the Revival.
I didn't know that. I just remember I always say sometimes I'll learn something new at least once a week.
But where there is failure, there is opportunity. While they were in line to be the next National Tag Team Championship, again in Georgia, where the national TV exposure was king, Matt Bourne was arrested. And so their push was stopped. The tag team was broken up. And because Matt Bourne was arrested and because Arn Anderson and Matt Bourne were not going to be the National Tag Team Champions, that opened the door for another tag team that Ole Anderson had in mind. That team would be the Road Warriors.
Okay. Gotcha.
So, yeah. But yeah, had Matt Bourne not been arrested, that's one of the big what ifs in wrestling history. Had Matt Bourne not been arrested and Arn Anderson and Matt Bourne had been the National Tag Team Champions and were going to follow through on the big push that they were due, who knows when or where the Road Warriors would have debuted at the time. But yeah, Ole Anderson needed a tag team quick, and because Matt and Arn were out, and that's what hastened the push, and the Road Warriors debuted the same week that Arn and Matt Bourne were supposed to win the tag team championship.
It's insane. Wow.
Yeah. Speaking of insane, Dan, that same date, staying on November 25th, 1985, in Madison Square Garden, the Women's World Championship match. This is considered the other screw job. We talked about in our last episode, 2 episodes back, of the anniversary of the Montreal screw job. Well, this is the other screw job in professional wrestling. The Women's World Champion was Wendy Richter. Who at the time was as popular, if in some places even more popular than Hulk Hogan. In 1985, Hulkamania, WrestleMania were still running wild, and the travel was insane. So in some territories where WWF would hold 2 different cards in 2 different cities on the same day, Hulk Hogan could main event in one neck of the country, and Wendy Richter would main event in another part of the country, which is unheard of. A women's title match being the main event. Now this is 30 years before Sasha and Becky and Charlotte are doing it, main eventing cards. Wendy Richter in 1985 was main eventing house shows as a women's champion. And this is long after Cyndi Lauper was no longer taking her to ringside. She'd come to the ring to Girls Just Want to Have Fun or She Bop, and the crowd would go nuts. Well, Vince McMahon could see how popular she was, so he wanted to sign her to a more binding contract.
Sure.
All Wendy Richter said was, let me look it over with my lawyers, and I'll get back to you. As soon as Vince McMahon heard that, he decided, well, let's get the belt off her. She's going to be trouble. So, November 25th, 1985, Wendy Richter was going to defend her women's championship against the Spider Lady. Now, the Spider Lady had always been Penny Mitchell. She had wrestled on other cards and against Wendy and other places. When Wendy wasn't wrestling Fabulous Moolah or Leilani Kai, she'd wrestled the Spider Lady, Penny Mitchell, just for a quick victory. Well, in this particular match, the Spider Lady and the referee Dick Kroll seemed to be on the same page, but on a different book altogether with Wendy, because all of Dick Kroll's counts were fast, and when the Spider Lady pinned Wendy Richter with an inside cradle, referee Dick Kroll continued to count as Wendy Richter was kicking out. He counted to 3 and just handed the belt to the Spider Lady. Wendy Richter, knowing something was up, attacked and grabbed at the Spider Lady, and the Spider Lady let her mask get ripped off, revealing that it was the Fabulous Moolah. And Wendy went after her with some real shots, and Moolah, who was a 40-year veteran at this point, defended herself. Wendy picked up the belt and tried to hit Moolah with it. Moolah wasn't selling it. And finally, Wendy just left the ring. In the announcer, Howard Finkel even said, the winner of the match, the Spider Lady? And so he wasn't in on it, the way that Moolah and the referee were. Moolah was given the championship, crowned the new WWF Women's Champion. Wendy Richter left the ring and would never return to the WWE again, not until 2009 when she was inducted into the Hall of Fame. But Wendy Richter never wrestled for the WWF again. She wrestled in the AWA a little bit and some in the independent circle, but because she didn't have that WWF mega media machine behind her, like most wrestlers who left the WWF at the height of the fame, i.e. her, Sergeant Slaughter, it was never quite the same. Some people say that since Wendy Richter was trained by Fabulous Moolah and had been in the ring had been tag team with Moolah and been around Moolah more than anyone else, how could she not know that was Moolah under the mask? But Wendy claimed she didn't know. And in the episode of Dark Side of the Ring, when Moolah and other wrestlers talked about that particular night that Wendy might have known it was Moolah, but had no idea that her title was going to be taken from her that night. But the other screw job, in parentheses, took place November 25th, 1985 in Madison Square Garden.
Wow.
Yep. That same date, November 25th, 1992, Survivor Series. You noticing a trend here, Dan?
What?
Survivor Series. The World Wrestling Federation Heavyweight Champion took on the Intercontinental Champion. Bret Hart defeated Shawn Michaels with the sharpshooter in that main event in what would be their first ever pay-per-view match together. November 25th, 1992. 4 years before their last pay-per-view match against each other. Bret Hart and Shawn Michaels. November 26th, Dan. A huge day in the history of professional wrestling. November 26th, 1987 was the first, last, and only time the WWF and the NWA went head-to-head on pay-per-view on the same day. November 26, 1987, the NWA held its 5th annual Starrcade, while the WWF countered on that same day with their first ever Survivor Series.
Oh, wow.
The first Survivor Series, the WWF came up with this concept. I believe it was Pat Patterson came up with it. Teams going up against each other, individual wrestlers teaming up 5-on-5, and then tag teams doing the same thing. The first Survivor Series was held in the Richfield Coliseum in Richfield, Ohio. 21,300 fans showed up. And this was highlighted by Hulk Hogan's team against Andre the Giant's team. This was the first time Hulk and Andre had been in the same ring since WrestleMania 3 that same year. Also, that same year, Randy Savage teamed up with Ricky Steamboat, right the same year after their WrestleMania 3 classic encounter, to go up against the Honky Tonk Man's team. But the biggest thing for me was the Survivor Series tag team match. You had 5 tag teams on both sides of the ring. So you had 20 men on the ring apron. And the tag teams involved, you had on the one side Strike Force, the British Bulldogs, the Rougeos, the Young Stallions, Paul Roma and Jim Powers, and the Killer Bees going up against the Hart Foundation, the Islanders, the Bolsheviks, Dino Bravo and Greg Valentine, and Demolition. Shows you how deep the tag team, how deep the tag teams were in the WWF in the 80s. You had 10 tag teams on there. And so you had 20 men on the ringside. So throwing people in the ropes was an adventure because everyone had to move out of the way. And it was won by the Killer Bees of all teams. They were the sole survivors and the last team standing in that particular match. Also, stars were made. Bam Bam Bigelow who became the sole survivor on his team with Hulk Hogan. Bam Bam Bigelow would single-handedly pin both King Kong Bundy and the one-man gang before falling prey to Andre the Giant. But Bam Bam Bigelow's star was made. And later on, he would go on to have one-on-one main event matches with Andre the Giant in house shows across the country. On that same day in Chicago, the NWA was having his 5th annual Starrcade match that drew 8,000 people in the Rosemont Horizon. This was the first time that Starrcade had been moved out of the South, away from Greensboro, not even in the Omni in Atlanta. It was in Chicago, which drove a lot of the Southern fans away.
Yeah, really.
And the matches that were involved there, the Rock and Roll Express took on the Midnight Express in a scaffold match. This will be the second year in a row that the Midnight Express was involved in a scaffold match. Dusty Rhodes defeated Lex Luger for the United States Championship in a steel cage. And Ric Flair would defeat Ronnie Garvin to regain the NWA Heavyweight Championship.
It's a good match.
Yeah, that was a good match. Another good match was the NWA Tag Team Champions Arn Anderson and Tully Blanchard would defeat the Road Warriors by disqualification. Now the Road Warriors were built from Chicago, so they were the quote-unquote hometown team. They had pinned Arn and Tully, but the referee got thrown out, and so the new referee saw it and disqualified the Road Warriors. And you could hear a very loud, audible chant of BS from the Chicago crowd. And the NWA not putting the belts on the Road Warriors in their hometown of Chicago, not only that, but having them lose, effectively killed the NWA in Chicago. And the way Jim Cornette tells it, effectively killed Starrcade altogether in 1987. And the numbers bear that out. Like I said, in Survivor Series, the first Survivor Series in Richfield drew 21,300 fans. In Chicago, the fifth Starrcade, only drew 8,000 people. And the buy rate for Starrcade was 3.3. The buy rate for the Survivor Series, a 7.1.
Wow.
Yep.
Holy Jesus.
So, and it was the last time the WWF and the NWA went head-to-head on pay-per-views because the cable companies were not used to that. They would rather do business with the WWF since they had a proven history at this point of having high buy rates, and they didn't want to split their time because the WWF was on another thing that killed the WCW buy rate because the WWF pay-per-view was made available on more cable systems than the NWA because the WWF had more success on pay-per-view than the NWA had at the time. So hence the 7.1 buy rate for WWF, and the 3.3 buy rate for the NWA. But that would be the last time that the WWF and the NWA went head-to-head on pay-per-view.
Wow. On
that same date, November 26, 1994, remember I said 3 days earlier that Diesel and Shawn Michaels won the WWF Tag Team Championship on Survivor Series?
Mm-hmm.
Well, on this date, November 26, 1994, during an afternoon show at Madison Square Garden, Kevin Nash, one half of the WWF Tag Team Champions, would defeat the newly crowned WWF Heavyweight Champion Bob Backlund in 8 seconds to become the new WWF Champion.
Wow.
And would usher in the lowest income that the WWF had ever done in the company's history. Diesel, by winning the championship, would become the least profitable world champion in WWF history. Now, you could talk about, we talked earlier in the last week's podcast about it, 1994 being the lowest year, the worst year in wrestling history. Well, having Diesel as champion definitely didn't help. That same date, a year later, Smoky Mountain Wrestling had their Thanksgiving Thunder, and it would turn out to be the last show ever for Smoky Mountain Wrestling. And in a fitting end, all of the Smoky Mountain baby faces gave Jim Cornette their finishing maneuver, and Brian Hildebrand, Mark Curtis, who had been Jim Cornette's right-hand man the whole time, counted the last 3, and that would be the last 3 count in the last event, in the last match in Smoky Mountain history. Smoky Mountain Wrestling, through its short life, under the guidance of Jim Cornette, gave us more characters, more great storylines than any wrestling federation. I'll include ECW in there too, because a lot of the ideas that Paul Heyman had in ECW, he got from Jim Cornette. But it was Jim Cornette that gave the push, who gave the big breaks to Chris Candido, Al Snow, Kane, Chris Jericho, Lance Storm, Sonny, all under the watch of Jim Cornette. The man has an eye for talent, and he knows how to book. And so Smoky Mountain was a breeding ground for some of the great wrestlers that we know today. New Jack, the Gangsters. They owe their careers to Jim Cornette. And to Smoky Mountain Wrestling.
Anybody ask New Jack what he felt about what Jim said that got him fired off NWA?
No, I would love to hear what he has to say.
I would actually, yeah. It's interesting.
I'm not. You're never going to hear that sentence come out of my mouth a lot. I want to hear what New Jack has to say, but I would like to hear his take on the Jim Cornette racism controversy. But the last Smoky Mountain Wrestling event ever, November 26, 1995. November 27th, we're going to go all the way back to 1949, Dan, because Orville Brown, the recognized NWA heavyweight champion, got into a car accident that would not only almost end his life, but it effectively ended his career. And because of the car accident, he had to forfeit his match and the championship to his scheduled opponent. His scheduled opponent that night was Lou Thesz. So November 27, 1949, Lou Thesz would win his first of 6 NWA championships. And Lou Thesz, like I said in last week's HIAC podcast, would be the last undisputed World Heavyweight Wrestling Champion. When the NWA was the only, Lou Thesz, after winning his first world title, would defeat all the other recognized world champions across the United States, and Lou Thesz would be the last undisputed world professional wrestling champion. The AWA was founded in 1960. The WWE was founded in 1963, but before that, Lou Thesz was the only world champion in professional wrestling.
Wow.
Staying on the date, November 27th, 1986. Starrcade 86, the 4th annual Starrcade, Night of the Skywalkers. On that match, that card, Tully Blanchard would defeat Dusty Rhodes in a first blood match to win the NWA TV Championship. Oddly booked by Dusty. To win the match, you had to be the first person to make your opponent bleed. Dusty came out and bloodied J.J. Dillon, Tully Blanchard's manager. Tully ran out of the ring, and Dusty just beat the living crap out of J.J. Dillon, and J.J. Dillon bled like a stuck pig. So when it came time to beat Tully Blanchard, J.J. just wiped his blood off of his face and wiped it on Dusty Rhodes. Referee saw it. Dusty Rhodes lost the first blood match and would lose the NWA TV Championship to Tully Blanchard. That NWA TV Championship was a direct lineage to the Georgia TV Championship, first held by Joe Scarpa, a.k.a. Chief J. Strongbow. That same card, the Rock and Roll Express, would defeat the Andersons, Ole and Arn Anderson, to retain their NWA Tag Team Championship in a steel cage. And the Road Warriors would defeat the Midnight Express in a scaffold match. This will be the first of 2 straight scaffold matches by the Midnight Express. For some reason, whenever they were NWA champions or United States Tag Team champions all year, they would end up on a scaffold at the biggest show of the year on Starrcade. But this particular scaffold match with the Road Warriors and Midnight Express would result in Jim Cornette falling from the scaffold, being caught by Big Bubba Rogers, who misjudged the distance and would and with
outside of the ring,
destroying his knee permanently. But
sound, I got the sound right here.
Mm-hmm.
It's so sad because you see him land and you immediately see him in agony, and then the crowd, all you hear is the crowd go, "Yes!"
So sad. And the very next year, the Midnight Express would be in a scaffold match, and it was Big Bubba who went up there, and Jim Cornette kept his feet nailed to the ground.
What was it that Dusty said? Kick your feet up, and then he'll catch you like
he'll catch you. Yeah. And Jim screamed, "Catch me," when he fell, but Bubba wasn't there.
Oh, that sucks.
Yeah, but yeah, so 23 years ago, sorry, 33 years ago, Jim Cornette blew out his knee, falling off a scaffold. Today, 33 years ago today.
Jim, you fell so fast.
Yeah. But just to show you the state of professional wrestling back on this day, on this date in 1986, not only was Starrcade going on, Night of the Skywalkers, but in the Superdome, the UWF drew 13,000 people to the Superdome to watch their card, wow. and the world class still hanging on, had their annual Star Wars celebration at the Reunion Arena in Dallas, which drew upwards almost to 10,000 fans. So on this date, 33 years ago, wrestling was huge, doing big numbers across the South. So you had Starrcade, you had the Superdome show, and you had the World Class. So you had at least 60,000 people and upwards of 200,000 box office that day, on this day alone in 1986. And finally, on this day, we talked about him earlier, and I said, if you haven't seen Stone Cold Steve Austin's interview with The Undertaker, please do so, because on this day in 1991, The Undertaker, with some help with a chair thrown in by Ric Flair, the aforementioned Ric Flair, in Ric Flair's first ever WWE pay-per-view, with his help, The Undertaker pinned Hulk Hogan to win his first World Championship.
Wow.
Yep. So this was a big day in professional wrestling history. And that, my friends, is called The Wrestling Historian.
So, did you see, before we go, since we're going to do another double shot, we're going to do a double shot. Basically, we're a week behind because we did record this earlier. So we're a week behind. So next week, it will be the first and second week of December for Wrestling Historian. So we'll be caught up on Wrestling Historian next week. Did you see Dana Brooke and Batista flirting on Twitter?
I saw that. It's like I'm watching two guys. Just watching two people flirt. You don't really see that happening, and I was like, okay, this is.
I tweeted at Batista. I said pictures or it didn't happen.
Yeah.
So I'm okay with that. And also, shout out to former guest when she was a wrestler, Jessie K, Lady Ref. Was it WWE Lady Ref Jess on Twitter? Jessie Carr officially, right after NXT was done recording this week, the last episode, in ring in front of everybody, she was told that it was her last match in NXT because next week she was starting officially on WWE SmackDown on Fox. So, big congratulations to one of our favorite guests. She's been on once or twice. She loves doing the interview. She still loves talking about it or talking about the support she got in the past. And this is somebody who Jessica Carr, worked hard for this. Harder than a lot of other people. She took that chance, gave it up, left home. And I'm pretty sure it was within a year and a half, she was at Full Sail. And shortly after that, she was a referee in NXT. And now she's going to be a referee on SmackDown. And I know the last episode we talked about, well, the developmental league after Survivor Series, that's all up in the air now. Really, I don't think there's really developmental league. This is on Fox. This is the big time. This is in front of big stadiums, big arenas. That's a big deal. So I want to congratulate her. That's so awesome to see. The look on her face in the pictures where Triple H is in the ring, like, yeah, you're going to SmackDown. Because another alumni we mentioned many times in the past, Eddie O. Bandito Jr., known in the Indies in the Northeast, he's been on Raw for a while now, and that was also cool to see. All of a sudden, I was like, "Oh, he's on Raw! Look at that!" So it's really cool to see. I'm glad to see people who deserve it be successful. Yeah, that was a nice little thing. Maybe sign of time. I always get worried because the cycle's going a little faster for wrestlers and referees, but you see good referees, Nick Patrick and all those other referees that worked for the same company 20, 30 years. That's a good sign. That's a hell of a career. You still put a lot of wear and tear on the body. That's a hell of a Charles Robinson. That was the other name I was trying to remember at the top of my head. Charles Robinson's been doing the same job forever. And there's a guy who at the end of the show, we've talked about it at great lengths before, will still tear the ring down with the crew, Dan. So congratulations to those guys. With that being said, Craig, where can people follow you on Twitter, sir?
They can follow me on Twitter, on Facebook, or on Instagram, if they so choose, at Craig Ligons, CraigLiggeons.
Follow me on Twitter at DanLaw83. The HIAC Talk Radio Network is on the BradyHicks.com. It's on VOC Nation Radio Network on iTunes. And if you want to watch the video, YouTube.com/DanLaw83. Or if you want to listen live, Twitch.tv/DanLaw83. For Craig Ligons, I am the above average comedian Dan called Goodbye. See you next week.